Thanks. So my caveat is, of course, you get what you pay for. So we're all here volunteering to try to share some information about the decision. And just to give you a snapshot of how we're going to do this, I'm going to begin with some very brief comments about what the decision actually was, kind of from a legal perspective. That, I think, was made immeasurably easier by the way the decision came out. I was afraid we were going to be analyzing some very complex and nuanced decision about what provisions of the law remain, but that's not the case. And then Dwight and Sharon are going to talk about the practical implications, particularly for businesses, with respect to moving forward under the Act. So looking at the decision, from a very big picture standpoint, I guess I would make a couple of observations. First of all, they call it the Supreme Court because it really is supreme. So this means whether you like the decision or not, the decision has been rendered with respect to the constitutionality of the individual mandate and the expansion of the Medicaid program that is included in the Act. One of the other things that this decision shows, even for those of us who think we know something about the law and the way the courts work, is you just never know what they're going to do. And you never know how individual justices will rule on particular issues. I think for many people, the decision on the mandate was a big surprise, and yet that's the way it is. I was also always truly amazed, having worked both in Washington and then here in Ohio with state government, that the Supreme Court actually can maintain secrets. Perhaps the only institution in our government that can do that. And the last kind of major observation I would make is with respect to the role of the court. And this is something that Chief Justice Roberts addressed in his opinion, which is that the role of the Supreme Court when they review the constitutionality of statutes is strictly that. It is to determine whether the statutes are consistent with the Constitution. And they approach those questions with a presumption that the law is constitutional. Everything about the way the court has operated since it was established in this country is to give deference to congressional enactments and to look to find a way to uphold the constitutionality of the statute. What the Chief Justice said in his opinion, which I think may help people kind of understand the perspective here, is that the court doesn't have either, and I'm quoting here, either the expertise or the prerogative to make policy judgments. Those decisions are entrusted to the nation's elected leaders, who can be thrown out if people disagree with them. It is not the court's job to protect the people from the consequences of their political choices. Many people would put it kind of this way: elections matter, and elections have consequences. And I think that's part of what the court was, part of the reality that you see when you look at the decision. There are many people who speculate that the Chief Justice personally doesn't really like this law, and yet he was part of the majority, probably the surprising swing vote to uphold the constitutionality here. I'm going to talk really briefly about the Medicaid expansion in the statute. The federal law requires that states expand the Medicaid program to cover more people than they have been required to cover so far, particularly to cover everyone up to 133% of the federal poverty level, and importantly, to cover adults regardless of whether they have children. Under the current Medicaid program, as an adult, you are eligible only if you have dependent children. What the federal law said was, if a state fails to expand the program this way, then the state will lose all of its federal money for the Medicaid program. The court said, can't do that. That's too coercive. And so, in essence, they repealed that, or found unconstitutional, that one section of the statute that said you would lose all of your federal matching funds. And instead, the court said, a state has the choice about whether to expand the Medicaid program or not. If they do not expand it, then they lose the incremental increase in the federal matching funds that are intended to assist the state in implementing that particular piece of the Medicaid program. Certainly the piece of the constitutional challenge that has gotten the greatest amount of attention is the individual mandate. And the court did something that I think very, very few people expected them to do. They found that the Congress does not have the authority to impose the individual mandate under the Commerce Clause. Essentially, they said that the Congress can regulate economic activity under the Commerce Clause. But if you're not doing something, like not purchasing health insurance, the Congress has no authority under the Commerce Clause to require you to engage in activity. So as many of you have probably heard, some courts have said, if the Congress can require you to buy health insurance, they can require you to buy broccoli. The court said, in fact, essentially, they agreed with that lower court's decision and said, that's right, the Congress cannot require you to buy broccoli. They can also not require you to buy health insurance. But what they can do, under the constitutional power to lay and collect taxes, is to say to you and to me, if you choose not to buy health insurance, you must pay a tax. And there has been lots of conversation, and there will continue to be conversation about the fact that the court characterized the penalty for failing to buy health insurance as a tax. As you might imagine, that has all sorts of political implications to it. But from a constitutional perspective, the court said, yes, in fact, the Congress has the authority to do that. If you choose as an individual not to buy health insurance, and then you pay the tax, and that's the end of the conversation. You have not committed a crime. You're not going to be taken off to jail. Nothing else like that is going to happen. You pay the penalty. They also focused on the fact that the penalty, this tax for failing to buy insurance, is basically, in all cases, going to be less than the cost of buying the insurance. So the court found that it's sort of a meaningful choice that you have. And probably many people will choose to pay the tax rather than to buy the insurance, whether because they make that economic determination or for some other reason. I could go on and on, but I think what would be more interesting would be to allow Sharon and Dwight to talk about what this means now for businesses and the kinds of decisions that businesses have to make.
Could you clarify one item? Was the word tax in the legislation?
No. And the court said, and correctly so, of course, that there are many other instances where Congress has used certain words in statutes, not used certain words, and as the court has reviewed those statutes, they have made the determination about whether they believe that something falls within their definition of a tax. And again, I would go back to, they are supreme. If they say that's the way it is, that's the way it is from a constitutional perspective.